Jenna, the rebellious daughter in the Smith family. Jenna Smith, a passionate and creative 19-year-old, has always found herself out of place within the walls of her family's two-story home in a quiet suburb just outside Seattle. From a very young age, Jenna's lively spirit, her wild curly hair, paint-stained fingers, and tendency to daydream set her apart in the orderly world her father, David Smith, tried to run. While most teenagers in her neighborhood went along with the well-intended plans of their parents, Jenna was different. She chafed at every restriction, argued her opinions at dinner, and spent hours sketching in her notebook instead of reviewing math problems like her father wanted. Jenna's mother, Linda, often described her as a burst of color in a house that only allowed gray. Teachers noticed her talent for art early on and encouraged her to develop her craft. But at home, Jenna struggled to gain any support. Her father saw her passion as a distraction, something to outgrow, and he made no effort to hide his disappointment every time she brought home a painting instead of a science award. This clash between Jenna's longing for self-expression and her father's demand for achievement constantly simmered just beneath the surface of their daily life, creating an undercurrent of tension in everything from family discussions to the smallest household routines. Despite feeling isolated, Jenna never stopped pushing boundaries. She experimented with different painting techniques and secretly entered her pieces into local art shows, using pseudonyms to avoid family backlash. Her best friend, Marissa, was often her accomplice, providing supplies, encouragement, and the occasional alibi. For Jenna, art was a lifeline, a way to process her emotions, escape the suffocating expectations at home, and dream of a future that she could create on her own terms. Little did she know, the journey she was about to embark on would not only test her courage, but also turn the Smith family's world upside down. The commanding father and the oppressive atmosphere. At home, David Smith, age 52, was the kind of father who never left anything to chance. A highly respected civil engineer, David's life had always been defined by precision, order, and measurable achievement. He grew up in a hard-working Midwestern family where discipline ruled, and he brought that same uncompromising standard to his own household. From the outside, the Smith family appeared perfectly put together. Manicured lawn, sparkling cars, and a reputation for responsibility in the community. But inside their carefully maintained home, David's authority was absolute. His word was law. From what colleges his children would apply to the kind of friends they could keep. From the moment Jenna was old enough to talk, David planned out her future. Top grades, Ivy League school, a sensible career in law or medicine. To him, childhood passions were distractions, nothing more than whimsical detours from the only path that mattered. Success, as he defined it. Any deviation from his narrow definition of achievement was met with thinly veiled disappointment or outright criticism. David was not physically abusive, but his expectations loomed over everything like a heavy fog. The dinner table became a battlefield, with Jenna's creative dreams dismissed as childish rebellion. Linda, his wife, often tried to mediate, softly voicing support for Jenna's art. But David would quickly dismiss her input, insisting that he alone knew what was best. His love was conditional, expressed only when Jenna performed according to his script. Straight A's, chess club, academic competitions. Art was never part of the plan. Underneath his controlling nature, though, there was a deep-seated fear. David was terrified of failure, not just for himself, but for his family. He worried that letting Jenna follow an unpredictable path would result in heartbreak wasted potential, or financial insecurity. So he tightened his grip, believing that as long as he was in control, everything would turn out right. The result was a household that looked perfect on the outside, but was stifling, anxious, and brittle behind closed doors. The turning point: family fractures and shattered illusions. Jenna's experience at home had always been colored by the silent tug-of-war between her desire to create and her father's need to control. For years, tension in the Smith home thrummed beneath the surface, sometimes simmering quietly, at other times erupting in silent standoffs and cold shoulders. The real break, though, came on a night that started just like any other, on a crisp Thursday in October. As the air grew thin with the threat of an early winter, Jenna came home late from an art club meeting. Snow was beginning to dust the Rockies, and the world felt both expectant and heavy. She tiptoed through the hallway, hoping to avoid her father's routine interrogation for missing family dinner. As she paused near the living room, Jenna froze. She could hear her parents' voices, much louder, much sharper than usual, escalating in the next room. Through the crack beneath the door, she caught punctuated phrases and brittle accusations. "I am tired of always being painted as the villain, Mark." Her mother's voice was taut, almost unrecognizable. "Karen, you've never understood what's at stake. You let her waste time with paintings when she needs to be focusing on her future. I'm the only one thinking long-term here. She's not wasting time, she's finding herself. You never listen, not to her, not to me. You only care about control." There was a long, strained silence before Mark's voice dropped, heavy with frustration. "That's exactly the problem. Someone has to lead this family. Dreams don't put a girl through college." Jenna felt her heart crumple. She had always known her father belittled her passion, but to hear him speak so harshly, to hear her mother's pain laid out so honestly, made everything real. In that moment, Jenna realized she had been fighting the same ghost as her mother, a sense of invisibility, of being undervalued and unheard in their own home. The argument only intensified. Mark accused Karen of coddling Jenna, not raising her with the proper discipline. Karen, in tears, shot back that a house full of trophies and perfect transcripts meant nothing if it was empty of warmth and understanding. Jenna stood outside, numb. It was as though she'd walked into the raw core of the Smith family's dysfunction, stripped bare. Suddenly, the front door was flung open, and Karen stormed past Jenna, not noticing her in the shadows. Mark's voice echoed, "If you had just backed me up, things would have been different." The silence that followed was deafening. That night, Jenna retreated to her room, but didn't sleep. The walls felt closer, the air thinner. She tried to paint, but the colors blurred and ran together, an outward reflection of her turmoil. Around midnight, Karen came in, sat beside Jenna on the bed, and for the first time, openly confided in her daughter. She shared stories of her own artistic dreams, how she'd set aside aspirations for the sake of family stability, how she sometimes wished Mark had seen beyond his own blueprint for life. It was a transformative conversation. Tears flowed freely, but they left both women lighter. Jenna finally understood the depth of her mother's silent suffering and realized she was not alone in yearning for more. The days that followed were filled with tension. Mark withdrew, burying himself in work and emerging only to make pointed comments about Jenna's commitment and priorities. The house lost its rhythm, meals were quieter, laughter disappeared, and the old routines were replaced by uncomfortable silences. The fracture widened when, during a college planning meeting, Mark dismissed Jenna's dreams of attending an art school outright. He called her ambitions unrealistic and selfish, sparking another heated argument, this time with Jenna herself. Voices were raised, accusations hurled. Jenna, trembling, told her father she deserved to choose her own path. Mark insisted decisions would be made for her own good and stormed out. That moment was seared into Jenna's memory. Her father's unyielding glare, Karen's silent tears, her own voice shaking with both fear and resolve. It was then that Jenna knew she could not continue to live under her father's thumb. The harmony of the Smith home, once held together by routine and appearances, shattered for good. Jenna and Karen began to confide in each other late at night, plotting next steps for a future that had once seemed so predetermined. Mark, still clinging to control, grew more isolated. It was the beginning of true change, painful, raw, and necessary. Jenna's path was becoming her own, but it would take grit and heartbreak to fully claim it and force her entire family to reckon with the cost of control. The beginning of rebellion, a fierce commitment to passion. The revelation in her mother's room was more than just a late-night confession. For Jenna, it represented a line in the sand, a point past which she simply couldn't keep living as she had. The question was no longer whether she could find the courage to follow her passion, but whether she could face the pain and uncertainty that would come with confronting her father's rule head-on. That week, Jenna's notebooks were filled with furious, beautiful art, portraits of women shattering glass, plants bursting through concrete, storms battering, but not breaking the coast. The act of creation soothed her. It was proof she was still herself. With Linda's cautious encouragement, Jenna began researching scholarships and application deadlines for art schools across the country, including the prestigious School of the Art Institute of Chicago. For the first time, her future felt like hers alone to imagine. Every day was a silent standoff. David watched Jenna closely, misinterpreting her quiet for remorse, not realizing she was gathering resolve. At night, Jenna and Linda pored over college essays on her laptop, secretly submitting her strongest portfolio pieces to national competitions and grant programs. More than once, Linda wept, sometimes out of pride, sometimes out of guilt, for not defending Jenna or herself sooner. When the acceptance letter finally landed in the mailbox, Jenna's hands trembled as she opened it on the front porch. She had earned a partial scholarship to one of the most acclaimed art programs in the country. She ran inside and, for a breathless second, considered waving the letter in her father's face. Instead, she found Linda. The two embraced, crying and laughing at once. David was not so easily won over. When Jenna, finally ready, sat down and told him her plans, he exploded, denouncing art as a waste of time, condemning her decision as selfish and unrealistic. The fight was volcanic. Jenna, through tears and clenched fists, demanded to be heard. "You want me to be miserable my whole life, just so you can feel in control.
Where is the exhibit?
I want to live, Dad. Really live, not just survive." The standoff lasted for days. David retreated behind a wall of icy silence. Linda walked around like a ghost. Jenna, though battered, was unbowed. She began preparations to leave for Chicago, packing canvases and brushes before her father had a chance to lock them away. She worked extra shifts at a cafe, determined to save whatever money she could. Through it all, Jenna felt the tide shifting inside her. The fear that had once ruled her ebbed away, replaced by a stubborn hope. She was choosing her own future, regardless of whether her father ever approved. For the first time, the path ahead, while uncertain and lonely, felt honest and utterly her own. Jenna's rebellion wasn't just about art. It was about reclaiming the right to want something different, even if it meant breaking her father's heart or allowing him to see her not as a disappointment, but as a force in her own right. The scars of the Smith family would remain, but so would the possibility of forgiveness, growth, and, most importantly, freedom. Unexpected triumph in the family's first shock. As the leaves turned and Jenna settled into the bustling, creative chaos of campus life in Boston, the distance between her and her family widened before it eventually began to shift. In the studio-filled world of her art school, Jenna thrived. Her professors were demanding but fiercely supportive, encouraging her to push every boundary and channel her family pain into visual storytelling. She quickly became known not just for her technique, but for the raw emotion woven into her pieces. Her breakthrough arrived in the spring semester, just a few months after arriving in Boston. Jenna poured herself into a deeply personal painting, a portrait titled Light Through the Cracks, inspired by the memories of her mother's hidden sorrow and her own struggle for autonomy. It wasn't just technically refined, it was honest, brimming with vulnerability and hope. When Jenna nervously submitted the piece to a prestigious national student art competition, she half expected nothing to come of it. After all, she was just a freshman, and the contest drew entries from the country's finest young artists. The call came on an unremarkable Tuesday, as she was hunched over a canvas in a sunlit studio. Her phone buzzed, and a cheerful voice on the line announced that Jenna was a finalist. Not only that, but she'd be flown home to Illinois for a major exhibition in Chicago's celebrated modern arts atrium, her hometown just hours away. When the news reached Rose, she wept. Over the phone, her mother's pride swelled Jenna's heart, even as Rose's voice quivered with excitement and disbelief. Tasha rallied their old high school art club to carpool down for the opening night. In contrast, Charles received the news in shocked silence. For days, he avoided mentioning his daughter to colleagues or neighbors, deeply unsettled by how fast she'd disproved his warnings about unrealistic dreams. Opening night at the Modern Arts Atrium was electric. The hall was filled with critics, art lovers, students, and Jenna's biggest supporters. Her painting drew a crowd. Reviewers praised its emotional depth and courageous storytelling. One local art columnist wrote, "Smith's work casts a powerful light on the pain and beauty of fighting to be seen." Rose hugged Jenna so tightly, it nearly broke them both. Even Tasha had tears in her eyes. Charles showed up late that night, straight from his office, suit and expression, both crisp and unreadable. He paused at the back of the room, taking in the scene, his daughter radiant in the center of attention, her art resonating with people from all walks of life. For the first time, he caught a glimpse of the world through Jenna's eyes, the fear, the hope, the defiance, and the longing for freedom he had spent years ignoring. He watched as critics shook her hand, strangers whispered to each other with genuine admiration, and his wife stood next to Jenna, beaming with pride. It was a shock he could not process in that moment. Charles had prepared for so many imagined failures that seeing Jenna succeed, and on her own terms, felt like something had been rearranged inside his chest. He realized, for the first time, that his way was not the only way, and perhaps not even the best one. It was a night that forced the Smith family, each in their own way, to reckon with the power of belief and the possibility of change, the price of control, and the fateful conversation. For years, the Smith family had clung to an uneasy balance, a facade of order, holding back waves of resentment, longing, and disappointment. But on the evening of Jenna's art exhibition, as autumn winds stirred the golden leaves outside the gallery windows, the cost of David's relentless control crashed down with inescapable force. The crowd's energy inside was electric. Strangers applauded Jenna's raw talent. Art critics whispered in awe, and Linda's eyes glistened with pride and relief. Yet, away from the celebration, a storm brewed between father and daughter, a reckoning neither could escape any longer. David wandered the gallery's polished floor, feeling both invisible and exposed. He paused before one of Jenna's most personal pieces, a portrait bursting with color, pain, and vulnerability. In the painting's lines and shadows, he recognized his wife's sorrow and his daughter's stubborn hope. And for the first time, it struck him that this art was not rebellion, but a plea to be seen, heard, and understood. A mix of shame, anger, and helplessness gnawed at him. He felt out of place amid the laughter and conversation, haunted by the knowledge that it was his own rigid love that had fueled so much of the suffering on display. His memories flickered. The nights spent poring over Jenna's grades instead of her sketchbooks. His refusal to acknowledge her victories unless they fit his predefined script. Linda's tremulous attempts to broker peace at the dinner table. Every moment replayed itself as if projected onto the gallery walls, inescapable and unflinching. And David was forced to confront the truth. He had traded real warmth for discipline, and in doing so, had almost lost both his wife's trust and his daughter's affection. Jenna, having spent the past hour greeting well-wishers and friends, noticed her father's distant figure. Fear and resolution mingled inside her. She was no longer the timid teenager dreading confrontation. Tonight, she was a young woman with awards, supporters, and dreams within her grasp. But this triumph seemed incomplete without closure. A conversation she had rehearsed in her mind for years. She approached David quietly, her heart pounding, determined to speak her truth without apology. The two stood side by side, gazes fixed on the painting that had become the unwitting battleground for their love and pain. It was Jenna who broke the silence, her voice tight but unwavering. "Dad, all my life you tried to keep me safe by telling me who I should be. But I can't live as a shadow of your plans. I have to live as myself, even if it breaks your heart." David's jaw tensed. Years of habit compelled him to protest, to list his fears of risk, poverty, or disappointment. But the words died on his lips as he saw the strength in Jenna's eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to remember a younger version of himself, full of hopes that were gentle and wild, before responsibility narrowed his world into neat lines. "I wanted to build a future for you," David murmured, his voice raw. "I didn't want you to get lost or hurt. I thought if I steered you hard enough, you'd never have to struggle." Jenna shook her head, fighting tears. "Struggle is how I found out who I am. You wanted to shield me, but you didn't see me. You only saw what I was lacking, or at least, what I wasn't." Linda joined them quietly, her presence a balm to the tension. She placed a gentle hand on David's arm and spoke up, her words trembling. "We all make mistakes. What Jenna created here came from her pain, but her strength too. We have to let go, David. We have to see each other as we really are." David's composure finally broke. His shoulders slumped, and the set lines of his face crumbled into confusion and regret. "I never wanted to lose my family," he whispered, "but I can barely recognize what it became."
Here is the drive.
For a long
My
moment,
testimony is locked
silence
inside.
hung between them,
Be
deep,
careful.
filled only by the distant hum of gallery chatter. Jenna reached for her father's hand,
Where is he?
not as a plea, but as an invitation. You haven't lost me. Not unless you keep holding on so tightly. There's nothing left to hold but regrets. Her words cut through the years of bitterness like a fresh wind. David's eyes filled with unshed tears, the armor of certainty and control finally slipping away. He nodded, unable to reply, and squeezed Jenna's hand with a trembling grip. At that moment, surrounded by art lovers and strangers, the Smith family began to understand the true price of control. The loneliness, the misunderstandings, the years of love left unexpressed. In accepting what had been lost, they also glimpsed the possibility of a new beginning. Linda smiled, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. A mixture of grief for what might have been and hope for what still could be. The air between them was finally cleared, not with a promise that everything would heal overnight, but with honesty and an unspoken willingness to start anew. As the evening wore on, David stayed by his daughter's side. He listened, really listened, to her as she spoke to critics about her inspirations, to fellow artists about their dreams, and to her mother about the family they could still rebuild. For the first time, he saw his daughter in full color, brilliant, flawed, determined, and free. The admission of failure was bitter, but the glimpse of acceptance and of love, unbound by control, was a beginning, however fragile. Long after the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, the Smiths remained in the gallery, quietly gathering the courage to face the next chapter together. No longer adversaries, but a fractured family, finally willing to let go and move forward, come what may. Regret and an open-ended conclusion. David found himself standing at the edge of the bustling crowd,
Right there.
watching his daughter Jenna
that?
bask in the
Show me your
radiant
face.
pride and happiness of Linda. The brilliant gallery lights
Look at this.
caught the glistening trails of
It's a
joy and
confession.
pain on Linda's cheeks. Jenna's laughter rang with a new kind of freedom. Yet for David, the evening unfolded in waves of intense emotion. Regret almost too bitter to bear. Love he'd never learned to show. And a sharp, suffocating nostalgia for things that might have been. He drifted along the perimeter of the atrium as the cleanup crew quietly began to stack empty glasses and fold away rented chairs. He saw everything with a clarity that felt almost cruel. His daughter surrounded by professors, peers, and strangers who genuinely admired her, who saw her not as a project to be improved, but as a person, vivid, brave, complicated, and worthy. He realized that throughout all the years of tests, lectures, and unyielding structure, he'd never really seen Jenna in this way. She had always been coloring outside the lines, and he had only ever tried to rein her in. As the evening cooled and the clamor of the city filtered in through the glass, David's thoughts kept returning to a constant question. How had it come to this? How much love had he left unspoken, out of fear that sharing it would be seen as weakness? How many moments had he traded away for the empty promise of control? Linda approached him quietly, her hand resting gently on his arm, grounding him to the present. She didn't speak at first, only squeezed his shoulder in silent understanding. Their marriage had endured so much under the weight of his rigid expectations. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, how hard it was for David to admit defeat, to allow sorrow and hope to coexist. They stood side by side, watching Jenna accept congratulations from old teachers and friends, her eyes shining, her cheeks flushed with success that was her own. Later, as the last of the guests trickled out and the gallery dimmed to a hush, Jenna made her way toward her parents. There was a moment when all movement seemed to pause, a fragile hovering quiet as she met her father's gaze. Jenna's posture was both vulnerable and proud, as if she was standing on the border between the past she was leaving behind and the future she was about to claim. Her art had been her voice, but now, with raw courage, she found the words her paintings couldn't quite capture. "Dad," she said softly, "I don't know what happens next for any of us. I know you never meant to hurt me, but loving someone isn't about keeping them safe by shutting out who they are. It's about seeing them, really seeing them, even if it scares you." David felt emotion swell in his chest, hot and unfamiliar. All his defenses, years in the making, seemed to crack. For the first time, he allowed himself to really look at his daughter. She was not a problem to solve or a blueprint waiting to be drawn. She was herself, with her own palette of dreams, failures, fears, and triumphs. He opened his mouth to apologize, to explain, but the words choked in his throat. It was Linda who bridged the gap, reaching for Jenna and drawing her in. "We're still learning, all of us," she whispered. "None of us gets it right the first time. Maybe not the second, either. But we love you, just as you are, and we're proud of you. Even your father." The three stood in a loose embrace, not as a perfect family, but as people trying to forgive the past and move forward. In the background, the city sparkled, full of possibilities and shadows alike. There was no sudden answer, no easy reconciliation, but something fundamental had changed. David had let go. He no longer clung to the fantasy of control. He let regret wash over him without letting it drown him. He saw the pain he'd caused Linda, the years of silent compromise, and the fierce beauty in Jenna's rebellion. And he let himself grieve for time lost. It would take months, years maybe, for wounds to scab over, for trust to be rebuilt, for them each to find their ways back to each other in new, honest terms. Jenna would go on to find her own place in the world, messy, unpredictable, exhilarating. Linda would quietly revive parts of her old dreams and reclaim her voice. And David, no longer the infallible patriarch, would discover the humility and redemption that only comes from true introspection. Perhaps, in time, there would be family dinners filled with laughter and warmth instead of tension. Perhaps David would learn to ask, not demand, to listen, not dictate. The ending was unwritten, but the path was open, no longer shadowed by fear or bitterness, but illuminated by hard-won hope. On the walk home that night, David lagged a few paces behind his wife and daughter, watching them silhouetted beneath the city lights. He thought about the price of control and the gift of letting go. In his pocket, he found a tiny folded note, a leftover from Jenna's childhood, unearthed during her move to college. It read, in uneven little letters, "You make me brave." David pressed the paper to his chest. With regret, and with the glimmer of a new beginning, he let himself believe that perhaps, at last, he could make her brave too, not by tethering her, but by cheering her on exactly as she was.